Normally, the cycle's over when we get weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, and we've had some wicks below it, and we're currently below it right now. If you take some profits in Q4 before potentially a bear market in 2026, I think it makes sense to just be bullish on dominance until December. Alts would continue to put in lower lows against Bitcoin. I would say that dominance should end up back near the highs.
Kids, welcome back to another video. In this video, I have, again, it's an incredible honor, the legendary Benjamin Cowen back on the channel. He's my favorite analyst in the crypto space. And today, the topic of discussion is going to be whether if the crypto bear market is starting or not. I'm going to split this into 3 chapters. We're going to look into Bitcoin dubious speculation, altcoins dubious speculation, and finally, Bitcoin dominance and consumer sentiment. But before we jump into those, make sure to check out the sale on on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com with the link in the description down below to get a 10% discount. So with that said, Benjamin Cowen, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing awesome. I don't want to take the word any longer because I know everybody's dying to know if the crypto bear market is beginning or not. And I want to start with the first chapter, which is Bitcoin dubious speculation. And in this chapter, the first question is going to be, by looking at the bull and bear market support band and the 50 simple moving average, would you be in the markets or out of the markets for Bitcoin?
Normally, the cycle's over when we get weekly closes below the 50-week moving average. So that's kind of what I've used in the past. I remember watching Bitcoin drop below it in 2014 and just kind of not really accepting that it was over, and then it was. And then the next cycle, kind of like just recognizing that, hey, like when it drops below the 50-week moving average, cycle's over. Um, and again in 2021, same thing happened. I think in this cycle, I've been very, like I've talked a lot about the 50-week moving average throughout the cycle. And, so far it has held support and we've had some wicks below it and we're currently below it right now. So, I would say that if we get a couple of weekly closes below the 50-week, it's probably over, right? And it's not, it's more so a time-based thing. I think the hard part for this cycle is that a lot of the euphoric indicators haven't really triggered, right? Like the pi cycle top, the MVRVZ score, the terminal price. Just a lot of those indicators never actually flashed. And so I think a lot of people are waiting for them to flash, but I also think that time-based bull markets are important too. And if you look at the ROI from the low for Bitcoin, you can see that we're pretty far into the cycle at this point, right? Like if we were to put in another high at this point, then it would still be arguably a 4-year cycle, but it would have lasted a little bit longer than the one in 2017. Now there are some counterpoints. If you look at the ROI after the peak and you go peak to peak and you compare this cycle to the 2016 cycle, it did last a little bit longer. It lasted maybe another couple of weeks or so before the top was ultimately in. But that's what I'm looking at right now. So I'm essentially basing my thought process on what does Bitcoin do at the 50-week moving average. And really the other thing I think it's important to recognize as well is that the grand scheme of things, Bitcoin's only like 20% down from the all-time high, right? Like it's not a lot. If you have locked in, if you have a lot of gains, it's not like it's the end of the world if you take some profits in Q4 before potentially a bear market in 2026. It'd be like saying there was no reason to sell at 50K in 2021 before Bitcoin dropped to like 15K, right? Like, yeah, it kind of sucks, but if it happens, it happens. What I'm looking for, though, I'll say I actually don't really think these market conditions are like what we experienced in near the end of prior post-halving years. Like, I don't really feel like it's like that. The peaks that we had in those cycles were much more euphoric. And if you look at, say, like the social interest in crypto and you color code the price of Bitcoin by the social risk, you can see that there's like been relatively low retail interest this cycle, right? You can see these like blue here, just like that 2019 phase of the last bull market. So I feel like this entire bull market for Bitcoin has been a lot like the one we had in 2019. And you can see that by retail interest, right? Retail interest is pretty similar. And you can also see it through the lens of monetary policy, right? You're looking at quantitative tightening and higher, kind of higher for longer interest rates, just recognizing that Bitcoin USD went up, during quantitative tightening. And while Bitcoin USD went up during QT, we saw Bitcoin dominance going up, right? So if if we are at a cycle top, which is absolutely a possibility, I mean, it's always been Q4 of the post-halving year is when I thought it would be. And I kind of look, when I was talking about the probabilities a few months ago, I said there's like a 40% chance it'll be October, 20% November, and then 40% December. I really don't think we're going to have a top in November. I think it's either behind us or we'll have one more in October, or sorry, in December. But even in that case, it probably would only be a slightly higher high, not probably not enough to truly bring retail down.
Wait a minute. Did Ben just say that even if Bitcoin went to a new all-time high, it's not going to be enough to create retail interest? Boy, oh boy, was this a bearish video. And I'm telling you, as I edit this, there's so much more crazy things that Ben Cowen mentioned. So watch until the end. I'm just doing a quick sponsor break. So guys, if you're looking for a place to be trading crypto and Bitcoin derivatives, you can go to the first link in the description box down below to this video, which is a link to Weeks. If you click this link, you will get a 20% deposit bonus when you sign up and register. It takes less than 60 seconds to create your accounts. If you deposit 100 USDT and achieve a $5,000 trading volume, you will get a 20 USDT bonus. This ranges all the way to a $10,000 deposit and a $5 million trading volume to get a $2,000 bonus as a reward. So make sure to check out the first link in the description box, 2 weeks, if you want to start trading cryptocurrency. With that said, let's switch it over to Ben to see his other crazy insights about Bitcoin, altcoins, Ethereum specifically, and Bitcoin dominance.
So what I want to draw your attention to, though, is sort of figuring out the nature of where we are right now. Like, and if it is the top, what does that mean? And one of the things, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but it's relevant, is in 2019, at that top, right? At that top, it was also during a period where there was not a lot of euphoria, right? There was not nearly as much euphoria as there was in 2021 or 2017. Bitcoin was struggling to stay above $10,000, right? It was struggling to stay above 10,000. In the same way, today, it's struggling to stay above 100K, okay? So there's similarities in that regard, that you're basically just at a 10x multiple from that 2019 move. And what was happening back then, during that process where Bitcoin was like going below 100K, back above 100K, during that entire process, we saw altcoins being devalued, right? I mean, they were, so basically Bitcoin was kind of staying right around 10K. It was staying like right around 10K, but the altcoin market was dropping like a rock, right? So look at this here. If you kind of isolate when Bitcoin was above 10K, and then when it fell below 10K and didn't really get back above it in any durable fashion, what you'll notice is that during that time, alts were just dropping against Bitcoin, okay? So at the end of that QT bull market, in order to stay elevated, right, in order for Bitcoin to stay above 10K, it was sucking all that liquidity out of the altcoin market, right? So people were trading in their altcoins for Bitcoin, and because the altcoins were just plummeting. And that we kind of got a glimpse of that earlier in October. Remember when there was that massive liquidation event? So I think the way you play this right now is there's not really a great reason to be in altcoins. If I'm being completely honest, right? Like, there's not a great reason to be in altcoins. If you're going to be in anything in crypto, Bitcoin is the way to go. And the reason why I say that is because we're in the same type of process right now where Bitcoin is trying to stay above 100K, and alts have started their bleed against Bitcoin here. So the only way, the only way the cycle continues, obviously, is if Bitcoin goes to new all-time high. Therefore, the only way you get an alt season is if Bitcoin goes to massively new all-time highs. because that doesn't really seem, I mean, like, it might happen, but because we can't know that for sure, Bitcoin is a better place to be. I think that Bitcoin will hold on longer, and I think if the weeks go on and we're still just hovering around 100K while altcoins continue to be devalued, like, let's say, so like this week they're at 0.36, right? So this week they're at 0.36. But just a few weeks ago they were at 0.42. If in a couple of weeks they're then at like 0.32 and then they go to like 0.29 and then we still see Bitcoin at only 100K, at that point, I think everyone has to like just bite the bullet and say, all right, like the most likely outcome is we get a correction down to sort of a lower level and we just start working in these lower lows and lower highs. And then by the time we potentially get to much lower interest rates, um, maybe then we can start seeing a lot more interest in crypto. So I think right now the thing to do is whatever you have in crypto should be mostly Bitcoin. I'm not saying you can't have any Ethereum. I mean, I do own some Ethereum as well because I think that ETH bottomed against Bitcoin for this cycle back in April, and I'm still viewing this as a higher low structure for the ETH Bitcoin pair. But I still think like a majority should be concentrated in Bitcoin, and and if we get those weekly closes below the 50 week, I mean, it is what it is, right? No one likes bear markets, but I do believe that 2026 will be a bear market. I just think it's, is there anything left in store this cycle or not? And obviously, with price going down right now, it's not looking so great. But I guess one counterpoint, and then I'll throw it back to you.
Sure.
One counterpoint is that we've had this pattern a lot this cycle, where like we have, these slightly lower lows, like by Bitcoin, and it's certainly not the first time. It's just the reason why this time feels different than a lot of these other ones is because now we're kind of getting near the end of what most of us know as the 4-year cycle, right? So it feels a lot more bearish this time, perhaps than other times. But one thing to note, and I think this will kind of bring us sort of the reconciliation we're looking for. All the prior lows in these consolidation phases occurred on the day of the death cross, right? So when the 50-day crossed below the 200-day moving average, that's when all the lows occurred. And we're going to have that here in within the next few days or so, within the next week. And so that's going to be the opportunity for Bitcoin to prove whether the cycle is not over or not. And so I would be using that as sort of the the indicator, right? Like when the death cross occurs, do you get a rally back up like after all 3 prior death crosses, or does price action continue to wane? And if it does, and you get those weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, then I think, I think we probably will get about at least another 6-month downturn in the market before things start to potentially better by the end of 2026.
Okay, a lot to unpack there, but I really enjoyed that. It's always very logical when watching your analysis. It's always amazing, and I think the audience really like that too. My only sort of follow up to this would be, okay, if we lose the 50 simple moving average, then in very simple terms, yes, unfortunately it's over. If we bounce from here, then we can see a repetition of what took place throughout those different consolidation periods within this current cycle. But if we were to lose that 50 simple moving average and go to lower levels, my first question or first quick follow up would be, would that quick downturn be similar to the COVID crash era where you see that downturn for a few months, and when quantitative easing is introduced, you see a parabolic rally? Would that be the case? And if we see a break below the 50 simple, what levels would you be looking for Bitcoin to come down to?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if there is no euphoria phase, because there hasn't really been a euphoria phase, right? Um, I would say you're looking at about a 50% correction from the highs. Okay. So if that's 126K, then you're going back down to approximately 60 to 70K, right? And I mean, if Bitcoin were to rally again and go up to 130, 140, you're still likely looking at a 50% drop. So I think there's a really high chance Bitcoin will be trading probably back near the prior all-time highs at some point in 2026. Like that would be kind of like my target. Um, so essentially somewhere in kind of like this. this range right here, right? Um, that's where I would be looking to, to see if Bitcoin can find support. But again, I don't like that would likely take some time to get back down to those levels because I mean, just 100K isn't going to go down without a fight. I mean, that doesn't mean we can't go back down to 95K or 90K and then jump right back up to 100K a few times. Like 100K will likely be an area that people don't want to give up, right? Just like in 2019, they didn't want to give up 10K, and eventually they did. So I would, when I look at the 2019 move, like I would ignore the pandemic drop, right? Like I would just ignore that. Um, because I'm not really calling for a repeat of that. I mean, that was a situation where the unemployment rate spiked to like 15% overnight, right? So I'm not really looking for that, but I would look for just slightly lower highs and slightly lower lows for Bitcoin that would likely take it back down to the prior all-time highs, which also would correspond to that 200-week moving average, right? So that's what I would be looking for. And I would be looking for that regardless of whether whether the high is in or not, right? Like I'm looking for that whether the high is in or whether it's not in. I think you will get that downturn in the market in 2026. If Bitcoin were to go into a more euphoric phase, and like let's say everyone's just down in the dumps right now, and before we know it, like if Bitcoin is trading 50% higher or just something ridiculous that a lot of people aren't really thinking about, then you would likely have a deeper correction in 2026, right? Like then you would probably have more like a 70% correction
Oh, wow.
um, in 2026. But yeah, but again, like that would be from a much higher Bitcoin
Yeah, so
price.
nominally it would be the
So the
same level.
Yeah, so the target might still be around the same, and I'm not saying it can't go below 60K. I mean, last cycle we went below the prior all-time high, so it could certainly happen again. But you instead of looking at like a 50 to 55% drop, you might be looking at more like a 66 to a 74% drop in line, which is still in line with diminishing losses. Um, but that's what I would at least be looking for next year, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think right now it's difficult because everyone wants to know, like, well, is it over or not? Um, I mean, I think the reality is no one actually knows. I'm more so watching that 50 week and trying to just be like, all right, like this feels like 2019, and in 2019 when or sorry, in prior cycles when we lost the 50 week, it was over. And even in 2019 when we lost the 50 week, I mean, we did have one more rally after it, but it was to a lower high, right? The one thing that's a little bit different, I think, about this cycle than the 2019 cycle is or the 2019 bull market is that this is a post-halving year, not a pre-halving year. And also you have the ETFs, you have a lot of other stuff. I mean, those are convenient narratives, but there is a slight difference in the sense that in like 2019, we were getting lower highs. And then in 2025, we'd be getting higher highs, right? So it feels a little different in that regard, where the whole topping process in 2019 happened really quickly. And this one has been a lot slower. And so, if this were to continue, I mean, you can kind of see if Bitcoin's able to bounce down here, you can kind of figure out where it will likely go back up to this sort of these higher high structures. But at the end of the day, I do think it will ultimately feel very similar to that 2019 move. You have a top, and then the markets just kind of slowly grind down for a little bit as we wait for lower interest rates and as we wait for the return of the money printers.
Well, I think it's fair to say that in this case that we're still bullish until or if we lose the 50 simple moving average with ideally 2-3 weekly candle closes. And for me, that
Right.
concludes the Bitcoin dubious speculation chapter. And Ben, I think a lot of us are also curious about the altcoin dubious speculation. And this will be a two parts question, chapter 2. So the first question is, the Fed announced quantitative tightening ending on December the 1st. As we approach that date, how do you see altcoins reacting?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think there's a decent chance that altcoins find a low against Bitcoin in December. If you look at total two minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, so this actually includes Ethereum. One of the things you'll notice is that while it feels different than the 2017 cycle, I mean, in a lot of ways it is. What's not different is that total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin found a low the very first week of December in 2017, right? Um, and so it would just kind of line up perfectly, for like the low back then was December, the first week of December 2017. And so what if that's also the low again this cycle? It's just the low is the first week of December 2025 for alt Bitcoin pairs. Um, and there's further evidence to suggest that December could be a low for all Bitcoin pairs. And that's the fact that in 2019, when you had quantitative tightening, right? And when the Fed pivoted from QT to QE, that also formed a low for alt Bitcoin pairs. So, you know, I've been riding the Bitcoin dominance train for like 4.5 years at this point. But I think that I actually think that we're likely going to see a big unwind, continued unwind by alt Bitcoin pairs over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And then I wouldn't be surprised to see some type of like maybe double bottom or something like that for this chart. Like I think it could play out like that. Or maybe even a slightly lower low. But I could see a low forming in early December, and that would be in line with what happened in 2017, and it would be in line with what happened, when QT ended in 2019. So the problem I have with altcoins, like right this minute, is that again, like there's not, in my opinion, and there are some altcoins that are not trading this way, but like collectively, most alts are bleeding. Um, the reason why I have a hard time like wanting to buy them is because like they're still just bleeding to Bitcoin. And you could argue that if they do form a low in December on their Bitcoin pairs, they only rally on their USD pairs if Bitcoin is also rallying, right? If Bitcoin is going down, all Bitcoin pairs might bottom, but their USD valuations could be dropping. That's what happened in 2019, right? So like in 2019 when QT ended, alt Bitcoin pairs bottomed, but if you were to look at total 2 and overlay it onto the same chart, what you'll notice um, is that while alt Bitcoin pairs found a low when QT ended, that did not mean that alt season was starting, right? Like alts still continued to bleed. It's just that they were bleeding less than Bitcoin. And the reason they were bleeding less than Bitcoin was because they had already been annihilated, kind of like today, right? Like they've already been annihilated in a lot of ways. And I do think they will continue to bleed against Bitcoin for a few more weeks. But when quantitative tightening ends, and when as interest rates get lower, some of the riskier stuff is going to stop bleeding as much against Bitcoin. And so that's what I would say. Like I would say if you're interested in altcoins, and you're wanting to go, if you have like money burning a hole in your pocket and you're wanting to go out and buy altcoins, like right this minute, like I would say like if you have to absolutely buy crypto, like Bitcoin is the better way to go right now because you can see that they're bleeding, right? Like you can see that altcoins are bleeding against Bitcoin. And that bleed is I would say it's likely going to continue until they're back down here at these lows from June. There's a lot of times in history where you have a low in June for an altcoin and then like a double bottom 6 months later. Okay. So I would watch for alt Bitcoin pairs to bleed for the next 1 month. And then in 1 month, I think they will be at a low on their Bitcoin pairs. And then you can make a decision about altcoins. You can say, all right, and you don't have to know what's going to happen between now and then to make the decision. You just have to know what happens at the time. If Bitcoin is going parabolic at the time on its USD valuation, then it would make more sense to buy altcoins because they've double bottomed on their Bitcoin pairs, and now they're gonna chase Bitcoin after the market cycle euphoric top. If alt Bitcoin pairs double bottom and Bitcoin is trading at like 70K or 80K or something like that, like the cycle's over. There's no reason to go buy altcoins. Like you're just basically pouring your money into something that's going to keep bleeding for most of 2026. So that's where I am, right? So I think right now it still makes sense to be mostly whatever you want in crypto, just have it more so concentrated in Bitcoin. And then when it comes to altcoins, look for this chart to potentially like double bottom or maybe a slightly lower low in December, and then we can make more of an informed decision on what the altcoin market could actually do. I'm waiting to see, all right, after the death cross by Bitcoin, after all these things, maybe when the government shutdown ends, after these things, does that lead to another rally by Bitcoin? If it does, then I might start paying more attention to the altcoin market. But remember, every single rally that Bitcoin has had out of one of these lows to new all-time highs, Bitcoin dominance has gone up every single one of those times, right? So again, you're probably better off without altcoins for the next 4 weeks, and then we'll see where we are in 4 weeks.
Well, my follow-up question is that in 2017, there were less than 3,000 cryptocurrencies that were available in the markets. And the market cap of USDT was approximately $1.1 billion in December of 2017, which is similar to Fartcoin's market cap today. Less cryptos in USDT being new, in my opinion, meant that investors took profits in altcoin pairs. And since liquidity was distributed amongst a smaller number of assets, it led to a more severe upwards reaction in altcoins. And that was also a period where we weren't in quantitative easing. In 2020 and 2021, the Fed essentially doubled the amount of money in existence. So when you look into this specific cycle, a lot of people are chasing altcoin season in a way where they want to see the gains that were produced in the prior two cycles. What would have to happen for altcoins to see the same amount of gains, or is it even possible in the first place?
It is possible. Although I'm sure a lot of people would be surprised to hear me say that. It's not impossible. What you need much lower interest rates. Every prior alt season, I believe, occurred when the Fed funds rate was below the 2-year yield, right? So if you look at US interest rates minus the 2-year, we gotta go to a regular scale here. So when you look at this chart, interest rates minus the 2-year yield, we're currently at 0.69. And so that means that we're theoretically, the Fed is in restrictive territory. Okay. So what you'll notice is that all the alt seasons that we've had generally occur, when you're closer to that sort of that zero line or when you're below it. You can see like all the prior alt seasons, like in 2017, and even the one sort of in 2013. A lot of them occurred when the Fed funds rate was closer to the neutral rate. And we've been so far above the neutral rate for so long that hasn't happened. Now, the issue is that a lot of these green shaded regions, these are recessions, right? And that's what we want to avoid. We don't want to go into a recession, because if you go into a recession and you go down here, you're not pumping, right? Nothing's going up at that point. But if we can avoid a recession and they bring rates down and things start to accelerate, it is possible. But the only way it's going to happen, I think, is if Bitcoin just screams higher, right? And I don't like, even if Bitcoin were to go to 130K or 140K, people still aren't going to feel euphoric, right? It's still, no one's going to care. In order to bring retail back, Bitcoin has to move up a lot quicker. And if that happens, then it could lead to something like that, where you have this more durable rotation into the altcoin market. But we're not at that point yet. And I mean, Bitcoin would have to probably be at least 50% higher than where it is right now for me to be willing to say that is a likely outcome, right?
Mhm.
And again, I mean, how do you get there? You probably need a few things to happen. I mean, it'd be nice if the US government would open back up. That'd be one thing. You probably would want another rate cut or two, right? Like if Jerome Powell, I mean, imagine if Jerome Powell comes out in December and cuts by 50 basis points, right? I mean,
Mhm.
if he did that, that would actually get the 2-year yield back down, or sorry, that would get the Fed funds rate down to where the 2-year yield is. So like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but the only way that's going to happen, if I were to lay out a perfect path, it would be the US government shutdown ends in the next 2 weeks. We get unemployment data for in December. And it's higher than we want, right? It's higher than we want. And then the Fed, at the next Fed meeting, whenever that is, it looks like it's December 10th. If the Fed sees the bad data and they then cut 50 basis points instead of 25 or nothing, then it's possible, right? Like, it's possible, but I feel like a lot has to happen, you
Mhm.
know, and I don't know if that's how things are going to play out. Like, there also exists an equally plausible scenario where Bitcoin just sucks liquidity from alts, stays above 100K for as long as it can, and then by the time we get closer to December and it turns out none of this stuff is actually happening, people finally just give up and Bitcoin goes below 100K and we go into the normal bear market. So, but I mean, like I think there does exist a path. It's just not yet obvious if that's the path we're going to take.
And when we see quantitative easing, is that going to influence whenever it arrives? And I doubt that it would be at the magnitude of what we saw in the prior cycle. But when it arrives, would it give any sort of impact to Bitcoin and altcoins in a dramatically positive way?
I think it would potentially allow altcoins to bottom against Bitcoin. That
Okay.
like that would be sort of the positive thing.
Mhm.
Um, Last cycle when QE started, it I mean Bitcoin went down for a little while, you know. Eventually things came back, right? Like, so I mean, like, if you have a long enough time horizon, right, like things will likely come back. I mean, there's going to be a future cycle, right? There's going to be future cycles. There's going to be other bull markets in our future, even if the cycle top is in. Uh, but yeah, so I actually think next cycle, will probably be less of a maxi cycle. You know, like this cycle has been more of a Bitcoin maxi cycle, right? Like if you
Yeah.
just were bullish on Bitcoin and kind of faded altcoins, you did pretty well. Next cycle, it might be a lot less it might be a little bit more difficult. I mean, like this cycle, if you think about it, was a relatively easy cycle. Like all you had to do was buy Bitcoin
Yeah.
and like ignore everything else. Next cycle, if you have a lot lower rates, we're going to have a different share for the Federal Reserve. You might see other things do better. And so next cycle, I could actually see Bitcoin dominance topping out a lot earlier in the cycle.
Wow.
Kind of like
Okay.
last cycle did. Yeah, it's just that this cycle, it played out in a much different way. But yeah, those are my general views right now. I mean, all in all, I think it was a fairly decent cycle, even if the top is in. What's really interesting, and this is kind of just like a way to check ourselves, is if you look at 3 month Heikin-Ashi candles for Bitcoin, like imagine telling someone at the end of 2022 that this is what the chart would look like and everyone will be depressed. You know, it's kind of like how all the government, like all the data, which a lot of people say is fake, but it's kind of how like all the data continues to say like the economy's fine, but then no one feels like it
No one's
is,
happy.
you know? Right, like everyone's kinda just depressed about everything, about inflation and about layoffs and everything. So there's kinda like the reality of what's happening on the chart, and then there's the emotions about how people feel about it, you know? And so, like, it's hard because, it's been a relatively good cycle, but you wouldn't know that by asking anyone, you know? Um so I think this cycle taught people good investing principles that they can take with them for the rest of their lives. Um, but yeah, at the end of the day, I think that it is really interesting how disconnected emotions have been from like what's happening with at least the price of Bitcoin over the last 3 years.
Yeah, and I personally think that the issue is that most people that even watch Bitcoin content and are from like a consumption perspective, like they should be like some sort of a Bitcoin semi-maxi or maximalist. Like even those people don't own Bitcoin and they only own altcoins. So when that is the case, then nobody is happy.
Right.
And that segues
Yeah.
into sorry, yeah.
No, yeah. I was gonna say you're absolutely right. I think that's absolutely the reason.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so too. And it's very sad because a lot of people ask, what is the best way to become rich in crypto? And the most basic answer is you just need to buy Bitcoin as frequently as you can on a set time basis for as long as you can. But that's a simple answer, and people don't like simple answers, and people like to overcomplicate things. And my final question is, Ben, we have to do Bitcoin dominance analysis. It can't be a Benjamin Cohen interview without Bitcoin dominance. So my final question is going to be Bitcoin dominance. Where do you see Bitcoin dominance going? Because I've noticed actually that I don't know if you use the bull and bear market support band and the 50 SMA on this chart, because when you do, you've seen a bearish crossover, and currently the percentage is retesting the bull and bear market support band and the 50 SMA. So would that to you mean that we see a correction here, or do you think we can go higher?
I think it's going to go a lot higher.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
all right,
I
okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was at like a lot. We've seen very similar moves before, where like dominance kind of forms a low in September, and then slowly works its way back up, and then once it breaks through, which is kind of what it's doing right now, it then really starts to move. That's what happened in the 2020 bull market. Also in 2017, you can see that it really started to move, and it found a top in early December. So I think it makes sense to just be bullish on dominance until December. And then once December's here, then probably be bearish on it. As far as how high it will go, that's going to depend on a lot of things. My base case is that it probably goes back up near the highs. Um, I don't know if it'll sweep the highs or not, because I think that Ethereum bottomed against Bitcoin already this cycle, and with that being the number two by market cap, if it's putting in a higher low, it would be really hard for Bitcoin dominance to put in a higher high. But I think that alt Bitcoin pairs could put in a lower low, right? Like, and we've already seen that, and that's kind of been my narrative for many months now, is that alts would continue to put in lower lows against Bitcoin, even though ETH put in a higher low, right? And so I think Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation will once again probably put in a higher low, but it's going to correspond to a lower low for alt Bitcoin pairs. And so, because I don't know exactly the composition of that and exactly where things are going to end up, I would say that dominance should end up back near the highs, right? Like, and I don't know exactly how high, but I would say this: just know which way the wind is blowing, and for the next 4 weeks, be bullish on Bitcoin dominance, and then wherever it is in early December, I would flip bearish on it at that point. Whether it's at, if we're at 70%, then turn bearish on it. If we're at 66, or if it just hangs out here at 60% and I'm wrong, I would still turn bearish on dominance probably in December. But again, like, that's still 4 weeks away, and I feel like a lot can happen between now and then.
Okay, well, Ben, thank you so much. There was one community question, and it can be a quick answer from your side. In our first interview that we did together, we conducted some Ethereum price analysis, and you called the bottom exactly on that interview where Ethereum came home, and you predicted that Ethereum would go towards new all-time highs. Now we're seeing Ethereum correct from those 4.7 territories to now $3,300. So when you look at Ethereum, does it concern you? Is it going against what you originally expected? What do you see for Ethereum? And then we can end it off.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Let me share my screen again.
Sure.
So with Ethereum, so what I did with Ethereum is I essentially bought it back in April, because that was when it went, like, quote unquote home, right? Was that the last time I was on your channel?
Yeah, it was exactly the last time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I basically bought some here. And then I sold a little bit, when it sort of swept the high. Not a lot, like, I still have the majority of my position. But the reason I did was because, like, I was very convinced that it wasn't yet time for alt season. And I think that alt season happens on durable rallies above 5K for Ethereum. Okay. But it felt like it was premature. Like, we weren't where we needed to be for something like that to happen. So I thought the first would get rejected. I will say this: I'm a little surprised that Ethereum has given up the bull market support band. Like, I'm a little surprised. I thought it would more so maybe play out like it did over here in 2017, where it was able to hold on to the bull market support band. So that does seem like a little surprising to me. We have seen it do that before, where it gives it up and still somehow sometimes rally to new all-time highs. But I will say this, you know, if you start to get those weekly closes by Bitcoin below the 50-week moving average, then it's going to take a lot longer. Um, sorry.
Bless you.
Yeah. So I am a little surprised. I still think there's a chance that it can get one more move up. And it could even happen on a Bitcoin lower high, right? Like, it's not impossible for Ethereum to put in a slightly higher high on a Bitcoin lower high, because the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is in an uptrend, right?
Mhm.
Because ETH Bitcoin is an uptrend, a lower high by Bitcoin could actually correspond to a higher high by ETH. But I will say this: I mean, if you get weekly closes by Bitcoin below the 50-week, I would say if you get 2 weekly closes below the 50-week, then I would probably have to, you know, call it on Ethereum and just be like, "All right, well, we're going back down to the regression band, and that's where we're gonna spend most of 2026." Um, I mean, it's unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
But that would be kind of my assessment. I was looking when it comes to Ethereum, I mean, I guess if you ignore the bull market support band, right? If you just ignore it and you look at how deep the correction was back in, from the August high in 2017 until the low, it was like a 48% drop, and, like, Ethereum has dropped already almost 40%. So, I mean, in that regard, it's not, like, completely out of left field. The problem is that if Ethereum is going to go to a new all-time high, it arguably only has 2 months left in the cycle to do so, right? Um and so that's why I'm not, I'm like, I have my position, I'm watching it. But if you get those weekly closes below the 50-week for Bitcoin, I think Ethereum will not have a sort of another rally before the cycle's over. Like, that could just be it. And I still think Ethereum would eventually go back above 4.9K, but it might take a little bit longer, if that makes sense. The one thing
Mhm.
I will say that I was watching, and I don't know, this seems kind of like a stretch, but I just want to put it on people's radar. If you look at Solana, when Solana hit a new all-time high,
Mhm.
what it did was, after it hit the all-time high, it then got like this correction right here,
Oh.
where it dropped about like 37% to that wick low right here, right? It dropped like 37, and then it went back above the all-time high once again.
Mm.
And when it did that, it went about like 13% above the prior all-time high, right? So it first dropped, and when it did drop, it dropped over the span of, call it like 8 weeks.
Mhm.
I don't know how many weeks it's been for Ethereum. It feels like it's been longer than that, but maybe not. Um, yeah, we're currently in week 11 now. So it's taken a little bit longer, but the drawdown is about the same. So, like, if say the government opens back up, and QT ends and all this other stuff happens, like, it's not impossible for it to lead to one more spike to a new all-time high. But again, we have to look at the Solana chart and recognize that even in that situation, like, it still might not be a durable high, right? Like, it still could easily just get sold off.
So I'm
So
assuming that if we do go ahead and make a new high, it's not really going to come close to your prediction of between 5.7 to 7.5K. Maybe that's going to come at a later stage. Would that be correct to assume?
yeah, I would say the lowest. I mean, there's this butterfly harmonic thing that I looked at, and I feel like the lowest it would need to be for that to be somewhat of a valid harmonic would be 5,300,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
That's the lowest. And if you don't get there, then I think you just throw the butterfly harmonic pattern out the window, and which actually might be a good thing, because the end part of the butterfly harmonic is a very deep and brutal bear market, where you take where you end up taking out the low from 2022.
Oh no.
Um,
Okay.
so so it might be a good thing if that thing gets invalidated. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, if Ethereum were to rally back up and go to like 5K, 6K, and then we start a bear market, like, I would be very bearish, like, very bearish at that point. I'm already starting to wonder, like, what are the chances that's going to happen? I mean, it ultimately just lies with Bitcoin, right? I mean, if Bitcoin, within the next 2 weeks or so, Bitcoin should tell us if it's going to be above the 50-week or not, and if its weekly closes below it, then we just, we wrap it up, right? And we'll maybe come back in 6 months, because usually about 6 months into the bear market, you're often pretty close to the lows. Even if you're not at the low, you're pretty close to it.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to end it off. Ben, thank you so much. I mean, you guys felt the sentiment of this video. Let's just hope that we don't have to pivot into making, I don't know, AI, large language model analysis videos in the future. But Ben, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. I think it was fantastic. I think we covered literally every single area from a technical perspective that people are wondering, okay, what's going to happen next? So just a massive, massive thank you to you for coming on and giving your time and providing these insights. And to anyone that's watching, if you're not subscribed to Benjamin Cowen, What are you doing with your life? Please go subscribe. He is, and I'm sorry to all my other YouTuber friends, but Ben is my favorite analyst and YouTuber by far. And I do get a lot of inspiration in my videos from his analysis. So thank you to him for putting out the work that he does. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you all on a daily crypto update video very soon. Take care, and bye-bye.